perhaps. The destruction of infrastructure has left people without electricity and water. Transportation and access to basic supplies, the danger to persons with disabilities, the elderly, and children are causes of grave concern. There are pressing humanitarian needs for medical services, medicines, health equipment, shelter, and protection. The prospect of hostilities conducted in populated areas, compounded by the possible use of explosive weapons and direct participation of civilians, is also extremely worrisome. We urge all parties to avoid this scenario at all costs, bearing in mind the grave risks it poses to the civilian population. We call on all parties to adopt measures to ensure the protection of civilians and of critical civilian infrastructure, as well as to ensure unhindered humanitarian access to all those in need and the protection of refugees and displaced persons. We also reiterate our appeal to Ukraine and Russia to facilitate the withdrawal of all persons who want to leave the Ukrainian territory. Brazil expresses its gratitude to Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Moldova, Romania, and others that are facilitating the exit of people fleeing the conflict, including Brazilians and Latin Americans. Let me also take this opportunity to express our solidarity to all families who have lost someone in this war, to all people left without home, water, and electricity, to those who are fleeing in fear, sometimes with nowhere to go, and to everyone who is now trapped in a conflict zone, desperately attempting to find refuge. I wish to commend all personnel that are now in Ukraine trying to alleviate the suffering of the population. We know that you are doing your best in very challenging circumstances, and we know that more could be done to assist you in your efforts. Mr. President, few times has the General Assembly been convened under the Uniting for Peace resolution. By meeting today, the international community shows its unwavering determination to reach a diplomatic solution to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. A peaceful settlement of the crisis is not only the cessation of hostilities, it is about creating the conditions for a greater sense of security among all involved. It is about rebuilding bridges and regaining trust. And it is about respect. Respect for each other's legitimate security concerns, for civilian lives, for all countries that do not want a war, for international law, and for the most basic principles that have guided this organization since its inception. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général,
Mr. Secretary General,
chers délégués,
distinguished delegates,
nous nous réunissons à une heure très grave.
the hour is grave.
La Fédération de
The
Russie
Russian Federation
membre permanent
a
du
permanent
Conseil de
member
sécurité,
of the Security Council,
a lancé une
has
guerre
unleashed
d'agression illégale
an illegal
et
and
injustifiable
unjustifiable
contre
war of
la
aggression
souveraineté,
against the sovereignty,
l'intégrité
the territorial
territoriale
integrity,
et
and
l'indépendance
the
politique
political independence
de notre
of another
État membre de
member
l'ONU,
state of the United Nations,
l'Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Les notions de la Russie
The, no,
constituent une
the,
violation. Les
notion,
actions de la
the
Russie
actions of the Russian
constituent
Federation
une
constitute
violation flagrante
an
de la Charte
egregious
des Nations
violation
Unies,
of the Charter of the United
de ses
Nations
objectifs
and of its
et de
purposes
ses
and of its
principes.
principles.
L'égalité souveraine
The sovereign
de tous les États.
equality of all states.
Le droit de tous les peuples.
The right
à
of all people
l'autodétermination.
to self-determination.
Le règlement
The
pacifique des
peaceful
différends
settlement of
et
disputes
l'interdiction
and the
du
prohibition
recours à la
on
force.
the use of force.
En lançant cette guerre,
By unleashing this
La
war,
Russie
the Russian
cherche
Federation
à
seeks
détruire
to destroy
liberté
the
d'un
freedom
peuple
of a people
et
and
d'une nation
of
qui est souveraine,
a nation,
indépendante.
a sovereign,
Et
independent, and integral
C'est
nation.
une guerre qui est basée
This is a war
sur le désir
that
du
is
président
fueled
Poutine
by the desire of
de
President Putin
retour
to
à
restore
l'impérialisme
imperialism and colonialism.
Ce sont des jours contre
These
lesquels
are
les
the
membres des
days
Nations
against which
Unies
the members
luttent
of the United Nations
depuis
have been
des
fighting for
générations.
generations.
Et encore,
And the Russian
la Russie a
Federation,
empêché
once again,
le Conseil de
has
sécurité
prevented the Security
de
Council
s'acquitter de son
from
devoir
exercising
fondamental.
its primary duty,
protéger la paix
that of protecting the
et
peace,
la sécurité
that
du
of
monde.
the maintenance of international peace and
Nous sommes ici
security.
parce que la Russie
We are gathered
a une
here
fois
today
de
because
plus
the Russian Federation has
utilisé
yet again
son droit de veto,
illegitimately
que
exercised
nous
its
pensons
veto
est
right,
toujours illégitime,
which we continue to
comme
view
elle l'a
as
fait de
illegitimate,
nombreuses autres occasions.
as it has done on a number of other
Et
occasions.
la Russie menace
And the Russian
maintenant
Federation
l'Ukraine
has now turned
l'Europe
its threat to
et le monde
Ukraine,
entier
Europe,
d'utiliser
and the
des
entire
armes
world with the
nucléaires
threat of
en
nuclear
violation
weapons use
directe
in
de la
a
déclaration
flagrant
commune des
violation
dirigeants
of the joint
des 5
statement
membres
of the leaders
permanents
of the 5
du
permanent
Conseil
members of the
ce
Security
janvier.
Council this past January.
Mr. President, it was in January of this year that members of the P5 agreed that a recourse to the nuclear option, to the nuclear threat, to the nuclear possibility was wrong. They admitted that no one could win this kind of confrontation. Just a few days later, President Putin announced that he was going to resort to this threat, directly contrary to what he had promised, signed, sealed, and delivered 6 weeks before. And so here we are, with a war that is a threat to each and every one of us. Through this resolution before us today, we as members of the United Nations have the chance to stand up in defense of a free people and to rebuke the evil notion that might makes right. And now we must all step up and stand up. Canada urges all member states to unequivocally condemn Russia's actions and to vote in favor of the resolution that is now before the Assembly. Russia has not been alone in undermining these foundational norms and rules, Mr. President. Belarus has also violated its obligations under the UN Charter and under international law. By allowing Russia to use its territory to invade and launch attacks against Ukraine, Belarus is aiding and abetting Russia's illegal war of aggression. Belarus's decision to send its force into Ukraine and to revoke its non-nuclear status are all completely unacceptable to us and completely incompatible with its obligations under the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, there must be accountability for these actions. As Russia has escalated its unjustifiable attack on Ukraine, its forces have encircled and shelled Ukrainian cities, targeting, killing, and maiming innocent Ukrainian civilians, children, women, and men. They are bombing civilian objects, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, apartments, and homes. They're looting and forcibly displacing civilians. Many hundreds of thousands have fled in freezing temperatures, seeking shelter across Ukraine's borders. There are credible reports that Russian forces are using prohibited weapons, including cluster bombs, and imposing siege warfare on Ukrainian cities. This is not news that comes in last week, news that comes in this morning. Pictures one can see visibly on social media as to what is taking place. Very different from the wars that have been waged in the past. We know what is happening in real time, and it is completely abhorrent. Let me be very clear, Mr. President. These are violations of international law, and they are acts that could amount to war crimes under international humanitarian law. Those acts flow directly from decisions that were made by President Putin and his inner circle, that were enabled by Belarus and their leaders, and carried out by Russia's armed forces and its proxies. These crimes began with an idea. What was the idea? We don't have to invent it. All we have to do is read President Putin's speeches and watch his declarations. The idea that a group of people are lesser, unequal, and unworthy, unworthy of the protection of the law. The idea that a people, in fact, do not exist as a people, that they don't have a right to be themselves, that they don't have a right to their own nation, to their own country, that they have no right to the protection of the Charter. The way Vladimir Putin describes the Ukrainian nation and its supporters over many generations fits the description of the idea that I have described. And it's that idea that lies at the heart of the acts that follow, because actions don't come out of the blue. They don't come out of nothing. It all starts with an idea. And yet, with a terrible sense of irony, President Putin has perverted the very notion of genocide by alleging that genocide has been committed in Ukraine. I must stress, there has been no such finding substantiated by any UN or independent organization. And as my colleague from Brazil said, just speaking before me, if there are complaints, and obviously there have been in this chamber and in the Security Council with respect to the treatment of the Russian minority in Ukraine, even if those complaints were fully justified, they are not an excuse for war, and they are not an excuse for the aggression that we have seen. Ukraine has filed its own application under the Genocide Convention to the International Court of Justice. Canada takes the allegations filed by Ukraine with the greatest seriousness, as it does the decision of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to begin an investigation into potential crimes against humanity. These decisions are not taken lightly, and they have the most serious of consequences. But I want to stress, it is the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court that are the places for these allegations to be dealt with, not the battlefield, and never by unilateral aggression. That's why we signed up to the Charter. We signed up to the Charter because we agreed that we would subject our disputes to processes created by us over many, many arduous years and debates. What would be done in the event of a profound difference of opinion between states? We don't go to war. We go to the negotiating table. We go to court. We go to mediators. That's how we resolve disputes. The other way lies madness. Canada and the international community will spare no effort to ensure that violations of international law in Ukraine are in fact investigated, that evidence is gathered, and that the perpetrators are held to account. We do so not only out of our conviction that the use of history, that the arc of history tends towards justice. We do so because what Ukrainians are being subjected to is horrific, and they deserve better, and they deserve more. Mr. President, if I may, I'd like to speak directly to the brave people and the government of Ukraine. We are quite simply inspired by you. We are standing with you, and you are not alone. Our support for Ukraine, your country, for your Ukrainian democracy, and for your right to choose your own future in Ukraine remains unwavering, steadfast, and resolute. Canada will do everything in its power to help you as you hold strong and defend your homeland against this terrible Russian aggression. Together with our partners, we will ensure that President Putin and those who ordered, implemented, and enabled this reckless war will continue to face significant costs and to be held accountable for their actions. Your struggle is now our struggle, and we are with you. Mr. President, if I could speak directly to the people of Russia. To the Russian protesters who are bravely demonstrating against the war, who have been met with brutal force and arbitrary arrests by riot police, to the thousands of Russian citizens who have written letters, had the courage to put their name on a letter to the President of Russia, condemning this reckless decision. To all those Russians at home and abroad who are opposed to this senseless war, and you are in the millions. Canada and the world, we see you and we hear you. Your President, Vladimir Putin, has sorely miscalculated. He has ignored the democratic and law-abiding spirit of the Russian people. He has underestimated the brave Ukrainians defending their country from aggression, with whom you have no cause for war, no cause for hatred, no cause for violence. And he has severely misjudged the resolve of the world to stand against him. Whatever lies are spoken here today, trying to justify the unjustifiable or to explain the inexplicable, it is President Putin's war of choice that is making your lives much more difficult. But there is always time for de-escalation. There is always time for dialogue. And your president must choose this path. Should he not, I believe it will show just how much contempt he has for you and for the future of your country and the planet that we live on and share together. Mr. President, we should all say together, directly to President Putin, stop this war. Stop this war. Stop it before there is more death, more pain, and more hardship. Stop the use of threats. Take your finger away from the nuclear button and never put it back for as long as you live. Come to grips with the reality of our time, as in more serious and rational moments you have done. Mr. President, it is never too late to stop. It's never too late to make a turn to diplomacy, to dialogue, and to negotiation. The alternative cannot happen. So now it falls to all of us, as equal members of the United Nations, whose equality and sovereignty, as I've said before, is what we signed up to when we became members of this organization. We need to stand up to the principles, for the principles of the Charter, for the purposes of the Charter, and to heal the hurt and pain that has been caused by this terrible war of aggression. This responsibility belongs to us and to no others. We sit here, we have to make decisions. We have to take every step we can, the human footsteps to peace, to reconciliation, and to justice. That is now our job in the General Assembly, and we must seize this moment of accountability, this moment of justice, this moment of democracy. We must seize it together. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We are meeting today in a historic emergency special session because the UN Security Council was unfortunately unable to discharge its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security as a result of the veto cast by the Russian Federation, which is regrettable. We welcome the convening of this emergency special session as it allows all countries, especially the small countries, to raise their voice, to state their views, and to register their concerns in this universal organ of the United Nations. Mr. President, Singapore has always taken a consistent position on the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all countries. Singapore is a staunch supporter of the rules-based multilateral system and of the United Nations. The unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation is a clear and gross violation of the fundamental norms and of the fundamental norms of international law and of the UN Charter. The UN Charter prohibits the use of force and acts of aggression against another sovereign state. This is a matter of principle for all small states and a matter of fundamental importance to all members of the General Assembly. For a tiny city-state like Singapore, this is an existential issue. A world order where might is right, or the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, would be profoundly inimical to the security and survival of small states. We cannot accept one country attacking another without justification, arguing that its independence was the result of, and I quote, historical errors and crazy decisions, unquote. We simply cannot accept such an argument. Such an argument and rationale would go against the internationally recognized legitimacy and territorial integrity of many countries, including Singapore. This is why Singapore condemns, in the strongest terms possible, any unprovoked invasion of a sovereign country under any pretext. We deplore the Russian Federation's special military operation against Ukraine, both its operation in the Donbas region and the broader land, air, and sea attacks across Ukraine, including on Kyiv, the capital city. We also note with great sadness and regret reports of the growing number of casualties and the loss of many innocent lives as a result of this unjustified attack and act of war. We have taken note of the UN Humanitarian and Emergency Relief Coordinator's comments about the scale of the humanitarian assistance required to help those affected, and we call for safe and unhindered access for humanitarian assistance to Ukraine and all those in need. Mr. President, we reiterate that the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of all countries, including Ukraine, must be respected within its internationally recognized borders. The Secretary General of the United Nations has stated that he considers the actions of the Russian Federation to be a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and inconsistent with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. We agree with the Secretary General entirely. Let me repeat, we agree with the Secretary General entirely, and we support his call for the Russian Federation to withdraw all its troops from the territory of Ukraine and for the responsible actors to immediately cease all hostilities and prioritize diplomacy to address all issues peacefully in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. We also support the good officers of the UN Secretary General to be deployed in any way possible to facilitate diplomatic contacts and negotiations. Mr. President, let me conclude by saying that the world is watching us as we meet today in the General Assembly. As members of the General Assembly, we have to act swiftly, firmly, and with unity of purpose. Singapore is one of the main co-sponsors of the draft resolution that has been tabled for adoption in this General Assembly. Singapore will not hesitate to vote yes on this draft resolution. Singapore will always vote to uphold the principles of the UN Charter and to uphold international law. And I would like to urge all members of the General Assembly to vote yes for this resolution. And distinguished delegates, this resolution is not about taking sides. It is about upholding international law and the principles of the UN Charter. The United Nations, distinguished delegates, is being tested today. It is important that all countries, especially the small states, send a clear signal that we are united for peace and we are united to defend the principles of the Charter and that we are united to uphold international law. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore. We have heard the last speaker in the debate on this item for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers this afternoon. I would like to inform members that at 3 p.m. today, the General Assembly will first hold the 60th plenary meeting of the 76th regular session, as announced in the journal. This will be followed by the second plenary meeting of the 11th emergency special session, at which the debate on agenda item 5 will continue. The General Assembly has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of agenda item 5. The meeting is adjourned.